So NCHammer made a video debunking one of my videos, and I figured I would debunk his debunking of me. It's about my Why Naruto Has So Many Retcons video. I usually don't do videos like this, talking about other YouTubers, people that are trying to debunk my content, but because he's a much bigger YouTuber than me, I feel comfortable doing that. You know, you don't want to punch down anything. So let's get going, shall we?
I was scrolling through YouTube the other day, and on my scroll I so happened to see a new video from DygoKnight.
DygoKnight. What? It's DygoKnight. He's gonna do kind of a disclaimer here. Oh, I didn't like this video of Daigo's so much, but his content is great, yada yada yada. It's kind of obvious he doesn't really watch my videos if he can't pronounce my name. That's a little bit of a contradiction, isn't it?
Person who talks a lot about the same topics as me, be that Naruto, Boruto, other shonen manga and anime, and a person whose content I usually really enjoy. They do very meticulous research into the topics that they discuss, and the pacing of their videos isn't too brain-rotty. However, the title of the video that they put out did catch my attention, and maybe not in the best way. See, the title of this video that DygoKnight put out was something by the name of Why Naruto Has So Many Retcons.
Because it has a lot of retcons.
Listen, I'm not gonna sit here and state that Naruto has no retcons. It absolutely does, but most of those happen between Naruto and Boruto.
Frankly, I don't care about Boruto, it's not canon.
And even those, we're still waiting to see if that truly pans out as an actual retcon. And thus I sat down and watched the video, and I'm gonna be real, I disagreed with large swaths of it. See, because here's the thing, Naruto does have retcons. It's not the perfect story, but the way that DygoKnight talks about retcons, well, that just happens in every single manga. See, because while DygoKnight does commit the first 2 or so minutes of this video to explaining what a retcon is, I'm not entirely sure I agree with their breakdown of what a retcon actually is. See, it seems to me they understand the dictionary definition of what a retcon is, but when applying that dictionary definition of what a retcon is to Naruto, it seems as though that description in their brain gets a bit muddled. Now, I don't want anybody
let's see about that.
to think I'm making this video out of a place of disrespect to DygoKnight. Like I've already established, I enjoy their content. I just really don't agree with this video, and I feel as though a lot of these retcons do kind of come from a place of lack of understanding of the manga and the anime. And thus today I want to react to this video with you and show you the parts I disagree with, in hopes to allow you to possibly understand that while it may seem as though at times that Naruto does have a ton of retcons, it really doesn't. So with no further ado, let's get directly into why Naruto doesn't have that many retcons.
I have made a lot of videos talking about the Naruto retcons, and every time I put those videos out, there are a few people in the comment section that say, oh, this guy is the retcon guy. Everything for this guy is a retcon now. Stop calling everything a retcon.
See, and I understand where DygoKnight is coming from here. When you have a topic that does really well on YouTube, you tend to lean into that topic. That's how I was with Itachi for years. Anytime I ever put him in a title or a thumbnail, boom, 160,000 views. And thus, I do believe DygoKnight has actually kind of become the retcon guy because it does work.
No, it's not my fault. So when I was more talking about in the comments there that people try to demean my videos because they have the retcon word in them. But let's keep going, shall we? Slap the word retcon in red in a thumbnail. A lot of people click on it. People definitely want to see more about the Naruto retcons because it's a very interesting topic. So, and just for me to explain a little bit better my intentions with this particular video that I made. This is more of a high view of the retcon scenarios in Naruto, not talking about a specific retcon. And yes, I do mention several retcons to illustrate my points here and there, but I don't go too much in depth into them because I have other videos for that. This was a video talking about why Naruto has so many retcons and why I make so many videos about Naruto's retcons. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about the retcons because it's a cool thing to talk about. I don't lie about things in the Naruto series being retcons. Now, sometimes I put the word retcon in the thumbnail and I actually say, well, this thing here is not a retcon, and then explain why it's a retcon, but usually, most of the time, they are. The Naruto series simply has a lot of retcons, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. A lot of people equate the word retcon to plot hole, and they're not the same thing.
Alright, and while I understand that DygoKnight's not trying to equate a retcon to a plot hole here, I do believe that DygoKnight is trying to equate a retcon to, oh, the author decided to adjust the story to fit the actual timeline and character beats that they wanted several years later into writing this story.
Well, yeah, if you contradict things previously established when doing so, it's a retcon. It may not be a big one, it may be something pretty minor, but it's still gonna be a retcon.
What DygoKnight tries to establish over the course of this video is that Kishimoto did not have a defined idea for every single plot point in Naruto.
He didn't, but that's not a problem.
And Duh. No mangaka in the history of mangakas who have had to write a story over 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 chapters have ever had every single story beat established from the moment they put pen to paper in chapter 1.
The problem is when you start off with a different idea or a different perspective for your entire story, and later on you start to change things up, trying to make things a little bit different as your story goes, or trying just to make the story longer. Introducing new concepts is not going to be a bad thing, and maybe even changing some things you established in the beginning of the story because you didn't think the story was going to go that long is not going to be bad either. It's just that it's going to be a retcon, but that's fine. If it improves the story, I am completely fine with them.
What? But anyways, I feel rude to skip forward here, but the next minute of this video is basically him just describing what a retcon is. So let's go ahead and just put this in 2x.
Most retcons in the Naruto series are great for the story, and I like them. But what exactly is a retcon? Because some people may be confused about it. Well, the word retcon is short for retroactive continuity, and retroactive continuity is the act of introducing a new element into the story that contradicts previously established elements.
All right, but that's the thing there. Big on the contradiction.
Ooh, yes, the contradiction.
What I'm not really getting from this video is any true contradictions.
He's gonna say that when I talk about a retcon, it's not gonna be a contradiction, so I did something kinda cool here. I pulled up the dictionary definition of contradiction before I started the reaction. Oxford Languages. Contradiction. A combination of statements, ideas, or features of a situation that are opposed to one another. Now, pay attention. Those things can mean a lot of different things. Nick here, he is much more literal with his definition of a contradiction in the story. You're gonna see what I'm talking about later, but it seems like he doesn't take subtext into account very often.
I'm getting the idea that DygoKnight said, oh, there was the idea planted in something.
Yes, as we've just seen in the definition, ideas can also equate to a contradiction if they contradict each other.
Like chapter 30 that didn't necessarily flesh out into the idea that I believed it would flesh out to in chapter 300. There isn't a lot.
Yes, because if you plant the seed of expectation for a specific topic, an idea, into the readers, and then this idea isn't exactly what you were expecting, in not a plot twisty way where you planned out the reader to be surprised, but just in a, oh, it's a different thing type of way, then it's gonna be a retcon. Even if it's just an idea you put in the reader's mind, because as we've seen in the definition, ideas count for contradictions.
Lot of straight up contradictions in Naruto. In fact, Naruto as a story is pretty solid.
I agree. Most of the retcons, as I explained in the video, are not that major. They're completely fine, and I even prefer the retcon version.
Yes, you can say things like the Otsutsuki showing up at the end of the story bastardized the ending of Naruto, but it doesn't directly contradict anything set up in the beginning of Naruto.
Yes, it does. It contradicts so many things set up in the beginning of Naruto, and also set up throughout the entire story. A story where we thought we were fighting against other humans for the sake of mankind, for the sake of your own humanity, trying with your bonds to become a better version of yourself and not allow any curses that you received in life to shape who you are. But then we start fighting an alien goddess that was introduced in the last minute. Or are you gonna tell me that the entire Black Zetsu reveal there wasn't a retcon? Yes, you can also say that it was a plot twist, but you can be both things at the same time, and this one was. You see, when you have to rewrite the entire backstory of your lore, of your characters, Madara, Naruto, Sasuke in relation to Indra and Ashura, this is a retcon. And explaining that, telling the audience, oh, actually, this is how it happened, and it was never planned out, and I kind of came up with it in the last minute. Yes, this is pretty much the definition of a retcon. There are so many contradictions with Kage and Black Zetsu, and yeah, it is terrible. And you're saying that just because it's terrible, it's not a retcon, but no, it is a retcon, and it is also terrible.
Sure, we all wanted Madara to be the final villain, but that's not a contradiction. You can say, oh, not enough was set up early in Naruto for the reveal of the Otsutsuki to be satisfying or even wanted. That's still not a contradiction. Just
yes, it is a contradiction. For example, remember when we got the first Black Zetsu reveal in the cave with Madara and Obito? Madara touches White Zetsu, and Black Zetsu kind of grows out of him, and he's like, oh, this is the manifestation of my will. He is gonna guide you while I'm dead. You're telling me Madara did some type of jutsu or whatever weird thing with his chakra to produce this manifestation of his will. But no, as we learn later, Black Black Zetsu is this entity that has been trying to resurrect Kaguya for thousands of years, and Madara just didn't notice that he wasn't coming from himself, so he used the jutsu. Black Zetsu completely figured out how to appear as Madara was using that jutsu to manifest his consciousness, and just kind of fooled Madara like that. He didn't notice anything. Isn't that gonna be a contradiction? Now, you may say Madara was too old, he couldn't perceive things very well, but Madara seemed pretty aware of his surroundings, even though he was 90-something years old and almost dying. So that's just the first contradiction we learn about Black Zetsu there. The reveal that Black Zetsu was actually Madara's will was very interesting. We get a backstory for this strange character. Never mind that. I just fooled Madara into thinking he produced me, but how did you do that? How would Madara not realize he didn't produce that thing, that wasn't his jutsu? It's not terribly well explained, and it's a contradiction.
Because you don't like it doesn't mean it's a retcon. Sure, originally when Kishimoto was penning chapter 1, the original idea for the ending was that Madara would be—
I would argue otherwise. I don't think Madara was ever the original idea, and this is me speculating here. Obito was going to be the final villain of the war arc. Now, obviously, the ending for Naruto, the Naruto versus Sasuke fight, where they do the unison sign with their blood and everything, that was definitely planned out from the beginning. But when it comes to the final villain of the war arc, that was probably going to be Obito, because Obito was a much more present antagonist throughout Naruto Shippuden, but Madara was so successful and such a better character that, oh, let me give Madara more screen time and everything, which I like. But I would even argue that no, Madara wasn't even supposed to be the final villain before Kaguya even was a thing.
Be the final bad guy, but that ending being stretched out into the actual reveal of the Otsutsuki doesn't necessarily contradict anything set up in the beginning of Naruto. Therefore, it's not truly a retcon
As I said, it does contradict things.
as you define.
But it doesn't necessarily have to. Let's take a look at a couple of Naruto retcon examples, and why they don't necessarily create a plot hole even though they are retroactive in the narrative. The Nine-Tailed Beasts is a retcon. You may say, no, of course not. In the Chunin exams, we have the One Tail and the Nine Tails already, but they were never supposed to be two members of a nine-beast family. They were simply chakra demons that were supposed to mirror Naruto and Gaara's characters. Think about this. If the Tail Beast had been developed by that point of the story, the explanation Jiraiya gives to Kakashi when they finally meet again would include all Tail Beasts.
Basically what's happening in this panel right here, this is the first time that Kakashi and Jiraiya meet. And basically Jiraiya is conveying to Kakashi, hey, Naruto is on the shopping list of this new team of bad guys called the Akatsuki. And thus he's either gonna need to be more protected inside of Konoha or he's gonna have to come with me. So if we actually move this video backwards, we can see any proof that one of the items on the shopping list has the Nine Tails. To which Jiraiya replies to, it's a distinct possibility. After which Jiraiya backs up this evidence by saying, it makes sense. The Nine-Tailed Fox has one of the highest levels of chakra. Now, the point that DygoKnight's going to try to make here is that if the other tailed beasts had already been written into existence, or the idea of them was already in Kishimoto's head, at this point in time, why wouldn't Jiraiya tell Kakashi about that? Which gets especially strange when you consider the fact that at this moment in time, Gaara was actively inside the village with the One Tails, something that Jiraiya should have known about. And honestly, that's not a super solid argument.
Why not?
One, why would Jiraiya warn Kakashi about the Akatsuki trying to nab up Jinchuriki from other villages?
Because it's useful information, don't you think so? If they kinda know what the Akatsuki is planning, they can much better prepare for it. They could even inform the other villages if they feel like doing so they can prepare to fight against the Akatsuki, this extremely dangerous organization. Now yes, the villages are enemies with each other with all the history of wars they had, but just knowing the information of what the Akatsuki wants to do is going to be useful trying to stop them, will it not?
Jiraiya is actively talking to the teacher of Naruto and trying to warn the teacher of Naruto, hey, there's a group of bad guys after one of your students. Walking up to Kakashi and being like, hey, there's a group of bad guys after one of your students, but don't worry, he's not alone. They're also after two people.
That's not the point. The point is to explain to Kakashi the whole scope of the Akatsuki's plans. If the Nine Tails was a prime target, Jiraiya would also probably deduce if the Nine Tails is a target, they're probably going after the other tail beasts. So they're definitely up to no good, and then they can try to elaborate on what the Akatsuki is trying to accomplish, gathering all the tail beasts. Obviously, there are going to be a billion different possibilities for what the Akatsuki is trying to accomplish here, but giving that information to Kakashi would just make sense. Kakashi is a very inquisitive guy. If he knows they're after the Nine Tails, maybe he's going to ask, well, what about the other tail beasts? I don't see why they wouldn't exchange that information. Now, from a story perspective, introducing the tail beast concept here may be a little bit uploaded. The thing is, this scene between Jiraiya and Kakashi implants the idea that the Nine Tails, and even the One Tail by extension, are just weird, quirky chakra creatures in the Naruto world, and that's it. We learn later on that they are connected in this family of tailed beasts, and honestly, if this had always been the case, then the idea should have been signaled here. And as we've seen in the definition for contradiction, ideas definitely count. So the idea Kishimoto gives to the audience here is contradicted by new ideas and concepts introduced in Naruto Shippuden, constituting a retcon in the Naruto series, which is a good retcon. I like this retcon.
People from the Hidden Stone, 2 people from the Hidden Lightning, that other kid from the Land of Sand who's super creepy. It's just kind of useless exposition that has no real need to be thrown into this moment in time.
Yes, the exposition about every single tail beast and every single Jinchuriki is not necessary here at all, but mentioning the concept of the 9 tailed beasts is, so that we at least get an idea of what's going on. And it could also work as a little bit of mystery if you just mention the tail beasts and don't say anything else. The reader can be like, oh, what are these 9 tailed beasts? Huh, that's interesting. I want to keep reading. I want to find out what they are. It would actually have helped the story because it would keep the readers more invested and interested in what was going to happen in the future.
Top of that, in this very panel, what we're looking at right now, it says it makes sense. The nine-tailed fox does have one of the highest levels of chakra, implying that the nine-tailed fox has peers of which it has more chakra than. So
Jiraiya just says the highest levels of chakra, period, implying that the Nine Tails has more chakra than any person or any other thing in the world, more so than Shukaku, for example.
if anything, quite ironically, this page actually seems to more lend itself towards the idea that there are other tailed beasts.
We obviously know there are other chakra monsters and creatures in the Naruto world. In this very arc we see Shukaku. The retcon here is about the family of 9-tailed beasts, you know, going from 1 tail to 9 tails, that are all connected via the Sage of 6 Paths. And this is an idea that's certainly not planted in this scene here, and it leads the reader to think that the 9 tails and even Shukaku are something else.
And Jiraiya is more talking about the fact that Naruto is a high priority target on account of the fact that his tailed beast has the most chakra out of all of them, something that is established later on in the story. And therefore, in actuality, this panel's not really a retcon, it's actually kind of foreshadowing to the moment when Itachi says that Kurama needs to be sealed last because Kurama represents more than 50% of the chakra.
If Kurama needs to be sealed last, then why are they going after Kurama first? I wonder. Is it because it's a retcon? Obviously, right? They need the explanation that the Nine Tails is going to be the last one to be sealed so that they can leave Naruto for last, and so make the story more impactful when only Naruto and Bee are left during the war. But here in Naruto Part 1, when the concept of 9-tailed beasts wasn't a thing, then the Akatsuki was going after Naruto because he has the 9 tails, and the 9 tails has a lot of chakra. But there's no order in which Naruto has to be sealed.
Of the 10 tails. Like, yeah, could Jiraiya have given us more information here? Yeah, 100%. But Oda's been drip feeding us information about Blackbeard for 30 years, and nobody's calling that a retcon. And that
Drip feeding information doesn't mean it's a retcon or anything like what Kishimoto did with Madara in Naruto Part 1, and pretty much up until Madara's introduction in the work was something like that, and it's not a retcon.
That's my thing. Mangakas do this kind of thing all the time. They build out their story as they write it. That is a very standard writing practice.
Yes, and this is kind of the whole point of my video.
But I digress. Let's move forward.
Kakashi, when they finally meet again, would include all tail beasts. He would mention something about them. But clearly that wasn't Kishimoto's initial intention with that arc with Shukaku and the Nine Tails. When you read the story, you get a certain feeling that, no, yeah, these two beasts are separate entities, and the tail beast concept wasn't really something that applied to that. And why do you think they never call Shukaku the One Tail in Naruto Part 1? Because he wasn't the One Tail, he was just Shukaku.
Yes, they only start calling Shukaku the One Tail after Shippuden, and they only start calling Kurama when Kurama reveals his name to Naruto during the war arc unlocking KCM 2. Information regarding the tailed beast is hazy. And
No. Those two things are completely different. Kurama is never called Kurama before Kurama reveals his name, because Kurama never liked to reveal his name, because Kurama is a very reserved being. He hates everything, and obviously he wouldn't be telling his name to everyone. The tail beasts are public information. Hashirama sold 7 out of the 9 tail beasts. Obviously the Leaf Village would know their whereabouts. It's like countries in the real world will know where the nukes of the other countries are. The tail beasts were even used used in the wars beforehand, and we see that in the Minato one-shot. So no, the information about the existence of tail beasts and which village possesses them is definitely not hazy whatsoever. I would imagine the Leaf Village has books and scrolls and everything else detailing every single capability of every single tail beast. Now, you may say that because Shukaku was the only tail beast Hashirama didn't capture because the Sand Village captured that before him, they wouldn't know as much about Shukaku as the other tail beasts, but still, they would know the Sand Village, his possession over Shukaku, and they would at least know the gist of Shukaku's powers. And that's the thing. When Sasuke fights against Gaara in the arena, he releases a little bit of Shukaku's power with that strange looking hand at Sasuke after he used the Chidori, and after that, when Kakashi sends Naruto and Sakura and Shikamaru after Gaara and Sasuke, he's like, I think they're gonna be alright, I'm just kinda worried about that chakra. What the hell was that? We get Kakashi's inner thoughts, and he is very puzzled about that strange powerful chakra that came from Gaara. But that's the thing, after the retcon, every single village knows where the other tail beasts are, and Kakashi would know that the one tail is possessed by the Sand Village. So why wouldn't he think that? Especially if Jiraiya would tell Kakashi about the other tail beasts in the Akatsuki, he would connect all the points and be like, oh god, I just sent my students to fight a tail beast. That's pretty bad. But obviously, Kakashi didn't think that because the concept of the tail beasts was a retcon introduced later on.
It's intentionally so. The tail beasts are basically the nuclear arms of every single ninja village in Naruto. Very purposely, villages will try to keep as little information about their Jinchuriki.
The Jinchuriki, sure, but they all know where the tail beasts are. And Hashirama had every single tail beast except for Shukaku under his control at one point. So the Leaf Village, especially, would have a lot of intel on the tail beasts.
And tailed beasts accessible to the public as possible. And in no place is this more pertinent than the hidden sand. See, I know a lot of you are thinking to yourself, oh, Nick, but when Shukaku was initially introduced, he was talked about as the personification of a dead sand priest who was cursing the land. And you're right, that is how Shukaku was introduced. He's not talked about as a tailed beast or the one-tails.
Yes, this was the first introduction of Shukaku, and it was later retroactively explained how that worked, even though Shukaku was a tail beast in that flashback in the war arc. You can see there that by the way that one tail is talked about, it wasn't ever a tail beast because it's so different from what you're expecting a tail beast to be. Shukaku is the only tail beast that never uses the version 2 red chakra cloak that we can see all other tail beasts using in the war arc, for example, and Shukaku is the only tail beast that never used the Biju bomb. And if a tail beast as a concept existed back in Naruto Part 1, instead of Shukaku using that weird partial sand transformation in the forest when he was fighting against Sasuke and Naruto, Gaara would have used something similar to the Nine Tails' chakra cloak, which every single tail beast ended up having. They all have that red bubbly chakra, and they all turn into the version 2 when that chakra gets too intense, except for Shukaku because there was nothing back then. It's almost as if Shukaku being the only one to not use those things, to not have the red chakra to be different from all the others, is a contradiction within the story. Why would this one tail beast be the only one not to have those characteristics? And to mask that, Kishimoto makes sure to never use Shukaku in a not full tail beast form in the war arc. You can see there's never a version 2 Shukaku that he would have to do, because if Kishimoto were to do that, then it would just be weird. You're either gonna have to do the red chakra on Shukaku, which is going to contradict what happened in the forest back in Naruto Part 1, or you're gonna use Shukaku with a sand partial transformation, and then he's just gonna look different from the others, which is gonna look weird and contradictory.
However, the hidden sand is excessively secretive about Shukaku and all things surrounding Shukaku. And this started from the very moment they got their hands on Shukaku, because they were the only village to catch tailed beasts by themselves. They never got one from Hashirama. And thus the first thing that they did was seal Shukaku inside of an iron teapot alongside his first ever Jinchuriki.
Yeah, this is the retroactive explanation, you know, trying to make sense of what they said in Part 1. But even if you want to say that the Sand Village was extremely secretive about the one tail, the Leaf Village would still know that they have a tail beast, because they were talking about that during the first 5 Kage meetings, so they would be aware of the presence of a tail beast even if they didn't know anything about its capabilities. And so, if Gaara used a bit of that power in front of Kakashi in the arena, and he's thinking like, oh, it's kind of weird, why wouldn't he think about the possibility of the one tail being sealed inside of him? After all, he has experience against Naruto using the Nine Tails' chakra, and because they're tail beasts from the same family, it would feel at least a bit similar.
Bunpuku, and thus is talked about in the lore of the Hidden Sand Village. The reason that people believe that Shukaku was the embodied spirit of a cursed priest is because Bunpuku had to live his entire life alongside Shukaku inside of this iron teapot. And thus the idea of Bunpuku and Shukaku became inseparable. And all of this is talked about not only in the anime, but also in the manga. So
the other villages, including the Leaf Village, would still know that the Sand Village has possession over a tail beast, the One Tail. Unless you're telling me that the Leaf Village has forgotten about the very first important 5 Kage summit that they had.
lore a retcon. If anything, Shukaku being introduced in part 1 of Naruto in his more folk-tale-y way proves not only how little the worlds knew about him as a tailed beast and Gaara as a Jinchuriki.
That's, again, contradicted, the word we're using a lot here, by the first 5 Kage summit, where the first Kazekage literally tells them, yeah, we got the first tailed beast there, sand teapot, everything. Everybody knows about it. The general populace may be unaware. They may believe in the folk tale, but the extremely powerful ninjas, the elders, and everything else, they should know about the One Tail, including someone like Kakashi, a very inquisitive and intelligent guy.
But also how little the Sand knew about the both of them, because the information about them was purposely kept incredibly private. We have to get the lore
But by the retcon, it wasn't, because the first Kazekage told everybody that they got the first tail beast.
about Bunpuku from Shukaku. It's not a retcon, it's character development.
It's a retcon, and it can also be character development. They're not mutually exclusive.
Kaku the One Tail way later in Naruto Shippuden during the Kazekage rescue arc. And was it because they didn't know that Shukaku was the One Tail? No, everybody from the Sand Village knew about it. It was just that the concept of the tail beasts wasn't really a thing back then, so they just called Shukaku by his real name. Now for the Nine Tails, we just find the Nine Tails' name way later in the war arc, Kurama, and the Nine Tails has 9 tails because it's an animal from Japanese folklore.
Every
Family
single one of these
beasts.
tailed beasts is a representative of some Japanese folklore piece. Lots of
Yes, you're not speculating that, oh, there may be 8 other tail beasts with an increasing tail count up until the 9 tails. You're gonna be thinking, oh, it's the 9 tails from Japanese folklore. That's pretty cool, right? You're not gonna be thinking it's a family of tail beasts because the first one we get introduced to is the 9 tails.
Then it actually works. The only things that are contradicted with the inclusion of the tail beasts is that Jiraiya's explanation to Kakashi feels a little weird. Why wouldn't he mention the other tail beasts if they're going after Naruto's 9 tails? And also, why wouldn't he mention Shukaku, the One Tail, if Gaara is literally in the village?
because once again, it's not Kakashi's responsibility to save Gaara, and
Obviously not, but it's still useful information. Why would you omit that?
even though at this moment in time the Land of Fire and the Land of Wind were technically allies, the relationship between the two countries was incredibly contentious, which
Like, I was never even considering the possibility of Kakashi going and protecting Gaara because of that, but you'll have to agree with me that knowing as much as you can about a given topic and something as important as this is gonna give the Leaf Village and their powerful ninjas more of an advantage when they have to face the Akatsuki and other dangers.
which is best demonstrated by the fact that immediately after this conversation, Gaara launched an attack on Konoha. While yes, we can be almost certain that Jiraiya, the literal Lord of Spies of Konoha, understood that Gaara was the Jinchuriki of the One Tails, you have to realize at this moment in time that Jiraiya is only focused on the betterment of Konoha. If
Mentioning that, especially when Gaara is in the village, would be very interesting for Kakashi to know at least. So, for example, he wouldn't send his team of Ganons to fight against the Tail Beast.
all of the other Jinchuriki, aka all of the other nuclear arms of all the other villages get taken out by the Akatsuki, that's actually kind of a net positive for Konoha. So
Absolutely not. This is completely bogus. A criminal organization getting their hands on most nukes in the world will be probably one of the most alarming and terrible things you can possibly imagine. Now think about this in the Naruto universe. Jiraiya knows that at least 2 of the most powerful, dangerous, and vile rogue ninjas in the history of the Leaf Village are or were members of that organization, Orochimaru and Itachi. Well, Itachi's a double agent, we learned that later on, but at that point Jiraiya still thought, and he died thinking, that Itachi was the most evil guy ever, pretty much. Imagine those guys getting their hands on the most powerful weapons in the ninja world. That is so much worse than the villages having them and having this balance of power, because now this organization will not have any reservations in using them to the most nefarious means imaginable. It's not a net positive if the other villages lose their tail beasts. If you think that, you don't know anything about geopolitics.
long as they can protect their Jinchuriki in Naruto. And once again, it's not Kakashi's responsibility to
Protecting Naruto, yes, it's extremely important, both for the village and for personal reasons for them. But if the other villagers lose their tail beasts to this criminal organization, this is absolutely awful. So much so that later on in Naruto Shippuden, everyone is alarmed when the other villages are losing their tail beasts. It's not as if Tsunade's like, oh, that's great. The Cloud village just lost Niyugito and the Two Tails. No, they are terrified of the repercussions and they're sending everybody after the Akatsuki and trying to stop them any way they can.
save Gaara.
But it doesn't really break anything in the universe. Another retcon that works well for the story is the deification of Hashirama Senju. When you read Naruto Part 1, you are absolutely positive that Minato, the 4th Hokage, was the strongest ninja in the history of the Leaf Village. Everyone talks about the guy deifying Minato, saying he was the strongest, the most talented. They wish he was here.
Okay, so I want to go back to this panel right here because the way that he's using this panel makes it seem as though Hiruzen saying that Minato would probably trounce Hiruzen if they fought right now.
Yes, that's exactly the feeling you get from reading the Naruto series, especially Naruto Part 1, that Minato was the best there was.
Now, it's important to note here that literally no part of Part 1 of Naruto ever establishes Minato as the strongest ninja of all time.
Yes, not literally, but you have to read the subtext. That's the problem here. You're not analyzing things more inquisitively. You have to analyze the feel the story gives. When Jiraiya is teaching the Rasengan to Naruto, for example, he's like, oh god, that guy took 3 years to learn this jutsu? The 4th Hokage? Everybody talks about him much more than Hiruzen, about his powers, about his accomplishments. The story opens with Minato sealing the most dangerous chakra demon in history inside of Naruto, so that's the feel you get from the story. Whereas for Hashirama, it doesn't feel like Hashirama was all that powerful.
You want to talk about possible retcons? You can talk about the fact that Hiruzen is talked about as the god of shinobi, and then that title is summarily given to Hashirama.
He's never talked about as being god of shinobi. He's nicknamed the Professor. The panel you're showing right here literally says that. Yes, it says Hiruzen was a genius, and sure he was, and that he was the strongest out of the 5 Kage alive, but that doesn't mean he was the god of shinobi.
That you can say is a possible retcon. I would agree with you there. However, just how strong Prime Hiruzen was, we can't really know. There's no reason for us to assume that Prime Hiruzen
Weaker than Hashirama and weaker than Minato. That's for sure. You don't have to see what Hiruzen could do. You can get subtext from the story. No, Prime Hiruzen was not stronger than Minato. Prime Hiruzen was not stronger than Hashirama. At least later retconned God of Shinobi Hashirama.
maybe wasn't able to scrap with Hashirama. We just don't have enough evidence to substantiate that point. In the same way that we don't have enough evidence to say that people talked about Minato like he was the strongest possible ninja in the history of Konoha in Part 1. Because objectively, they didn't really do that. Yes, they talked about how it would be useful if they had Minato present right now to
They're not gonna say, oh my god, Minato was the strongest ninja of all time. People don't speak like that. But the way they talk about Minato, paying so much respect to him, wishing he was there so often, is a statement in of itself. They're not saying, oh god, I wish Hashirama the god of shinobi was around to save us here. And yeah, you may say this is because Minato died much more recently than Hashirama, but they never even talk about Hashirama at all in Naruto Part 1, except for when he's brought back via Edo Tensei in the Chunin exams, and that's it. Hashirama becomes much more important, his cells become much more important, and his power grows exponentially in Naruto Shippuden.
to fight against the battles that were coming down around Konoha, because the way that these panels are used in this video makes it seem as though Hiruzen is talking about Minato and saying, I suspect that not even I could face him, implying that Hiruzen is saying that Minato is stronger than even he was at his peak strength. But that's not what's going on in these panels. What's going on
He was.
in these panels is Hiruzen talking to Anko about what happened in the Forest of Death, and Hiruzen stating that at his current strength, he believes that even he wouldn't be able to face Orochimaru. These
Yes, we know that, because Hiruzen loses to Orochimaru. And Orochimaru even says, yeah, maybe if you're 10 years younger or something, you could have done it, but you're too old, man.
panels are about Orochimaru. And yes, at the end, Anko says if only the 4th Hokage were still alive, to which Hiruzen says, do not say such things. He sacrificed his life to save the village. That was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's not a crazy thing for Anko.
And that's her mentioning that she wished Minato was there because he was extremely powerful. Every time they talk about him is in that type of way. Differential. Oh god, he was so strong.
To say right here, of course, it would be awesome if Minato was still alive. If Minato was still alive at this moment in time, he'd only be 37 years old. He'd be in the prime of his strength. And yes, Minato would be able to slap the flavor out of Orochimaru's snake mouth. So it's not crazy for Anko to say it would be nice if the 4th Hokage
Yeah, but you have to think about this from a story perspective. What is this scene trying to convey to you? It is trying to convey Minato had a different type of strength. She could have said that about any ninja that has died so someone recently, right? She could have said, oh, I wish the Uchiha clan was still here, Fugaku or something. No, she's talking specifically about Minato because of his power. The story is trying to tell the reader this guy was so powerful, it's crazy. And it's not doing so overtly because sometimes you need a little bit of subtlety. And it works very well for when Minato is actually introduced. And we see he would have destroyed Orochimaru and Hiruzen. And this guy, yeah, he's probably the strongest ninja of all time. Take a look at the Kakashi Gaiden flashback. He defeats an entire platoon of stone ninjas, something that we've never seen a single ninja do before. And the entire scene is built with this air of mystique and grandiosity. The other Leaf ninjas like, oh, thank God he showed up. And then the other guy says, don't blink or you're gonna miss. Implying that Minato is gonna take care of the enemy platoon in the blink of an eye. And you just get this feeling that Minato has this aura of power unrivaled in the series. And then when we see Hashirama in the Chunin exams as a Naruto Tensei, we're like, sure, this dude's pretty powerful, but he's definitely not as strong as Minato. And Hiruzen was absolutely terrified of Minato in the Orochimaru fight. Don't forget about that. He wasn't worried about Hashirama or Tobirama. He was worried about Minato being brought back. Before the retcon, before Hashirama was elevated into a god, Minato was definitely the strongest Hokage ever. Hiruzen was never like, oh god, I can't do anything against Hashirama. He was like, I mean, it's gonna be tough, but let's get going. And he fought against Hashirama and Tobirama, still acknowledging that they were as strong as he remembered them, meaning that the power level that was shown in the Chunin exams for Hashirama and Tobirama was the original pre-retcon power level.
Hokage was here and said of our almost 80-year-old Hokage who doesn't think he's strong enough to beat Orochimaru. There is currently nobody in the village who can beat Orochimaru in a fight, and that is a problem that would be fixed if Minato was there. That's not deification of Minato. That's not them saying that Minato is the...
Okay, so you're trying to tell me that this scene here in the Kakashi Gaiden arc is not trying to quote-unquote deify Minato into this godlike shinobi, the yellow flash. Obviously it is. It is trying to portray him as a special type of person, as someone so strong that he can defeat a squadron with a blink of an eye. It obviously is. And the word deification here is used loosely, right? I'm just saying that Minato was thought to be the strongest ninja in the world in Naruto Part 1. That was the vibe, that was the subtext, and that was changed with Hashirama in Naruto Shippuden. That's the retcon. That's it. And I like it. I prefer Hashirama being the god of shinobi, being stronger than Minato. I like that.
The strongest Hokage ever. That's just...
And yes, he was the strongest Hokage ever because Hiruzen was afraid of Minato, of Orochimaru bringing back Minato, not Hashirama. So obviously, Hiruzen thought Minato was a bigger threat, even though he had history with Hashirama. He was his pupil.
Them stating a fact. But what about Hashirama? Is Hashirama set up as weaker than he seems in Shippuden? I mean, kind of, but that's only if you don't really take any of the context into the equation here.
What do you mean? What context? And what do you mean, kind of? You're just conceding the point here, aren't you?
And obviously in Naruto Shippuden, when we see Hashirama fighting for real, against Madara for example, then we understand no, Minato was strong, but he wasn't a Hashirama.
Yeah, but nobody ever tries to say that Minato was stronger than Hashirama.
Except for Hiruzen when he was so much more afraid of Minato during the fight against Orochimaru. You know, it's just the third Hokage who fought alongside every single other Hokage thinking that Minato was a much bigger problem.
That's never something that's stated. People said that Minato was strong, people say that Hashirama was strong, people say that Tobirama was strong. It's the feats we see from them that allow for us to dictate how powerful they are later.
Because Hiruzen thought Minato was a bigger problem than Hashirama, then we're like, oh yeah, this guy knows what they can do. And obviously, because he thinks Minato is much more powerful, he's gonna be stronger than Hashirama.
Later on, that's not a retcon because it's never established that Minato is stronger.
And as I just said, it was established. It is a retcon, and a retcon that I enjoy.
Than Hashirama.
It's very clear that Hashirama's original strength was supposed to be around the level of Hashirama's Edo Tensei that Orochimaru brings back during the Chunin exams. So much so that Hiruzen even says, oh god, Hashirama and Tobirama are as strong as I remember them.
So one, when he originally said that, I got curious and I was like, I don't remember Hiruzen ever saying that. And I reread the entire fight and Hiruzen never says that. I'm not kidding. Hiruzen and Tobirama pop out around chapter 118, and they're sealed using the Reaper Death Seal around chapter 122. And nowhere over the course of those 4 to 5 chapters does Hiruzen ever say Hashirama and Tobirama are as strong as I remember. However, even if he did say that, it's important to note that Hiruzen was like 22 when he became the 3rd Hokage, which means he was...
As quick and strong as ever, I see.
Even if you don't want to consider that, the fact that he was so much more worried about Minato, the third coffin, is already proof enough. And you're trying to say that he wasn't in his prime when he was fighting alongside Hashirama and Tobirama. How does that matter? Maybe he wasn't as strong when he was studying from Hashirama, but he would know how powerful he was in comparison to Minato. Also, just take a look at what this Ambu ninja that's watching the fight between Hiruzen and Orochimaru says when Tobirama uses his water style barrier to counter Hiruzen's fire style. He says, "Oh man, he's creating water out of nowhere. This battle is truly a Kage fight or something." Okay, he is absolutely glazing Tobirama for using water style without a water source. Something that later in the arc, we see a platoon of fodder background mist ninjas doing to counter Madara's fire style. So it's very clear the power levels were changed. This is not something even worth acknowledging when you're trying to make somebody sound strong later in the series, because yeah, everybody can make water without a source. Tobirama is the Hokage, he should do that, but then in part 1, that was supposed to be a major feat. And because the Ambu is so surprised by what Tobirama is doing, it is implied that this is a great feat, and therefore Tobirama was close or at his maximum strength fighting against Hiruzen. We obviously know this isn't true by what Tobirama does in the war against Jubito and other things. And so the same thing will apply to Hashirama as well, and even more so.
It was about 19 or 18 when Hashirama died. Hiruzen didn't get to see the peak strength of either Hashirama or Tobirama.
Just by his reputation alone that he gets in Naruto Shippuden, Hashirama should put fear into anyone that's about to fight him, especially an old man past his prime like Hiruzen there. But no, it was Minato that put that fear in him.
Strength feats we're using for Hashirama when he uses something like his 1,000-arm Kanon against a Majestic Eye or Susanoo, Hiruzen was not privy to. If he was alive, he was a child. So Hiruzen most definitely did not interact with peak strength Hashirama.
Yeah, maybe he didn't fight alongside peak strength Hashirama as you're saying, but he would have known him by his reputation. He would have known him by everything he could do, wood style, regeneration. Maybe he didn't know exactly about a 1,000-arm Buddha statue, but then again, that's just one more thing Hashirama can do. In the arc, when the 4 first Hokage are brought back via Edo Tensei, and when Jubito comes to life, Hashirama is like, I hate to say this, but this guy is stronger than me. And the reason why Hashirama says that is because we, as the audience, know that Hashirama is literally the strongest person there in the battlefield, maybe alongside Madara. Like, they're pretty much tied in power at that point in the war arc. So Kishimoto is giving that statement to Hashirama to signify that this new guy, Jubito, we know Obito with the 10 tails, is actually stronger than our strongest guy. We should be afraid. This is a big deal. This is a massive problem. And Hiruzen agrees with Hashirama. He's like, yep, I hate to say it, but you're right. This guy is stronger than you. Meaning that Hiruzen was acknowledging that Hashirama was the strongest guy before Jubito showed up. And Minato was there. Minato was also brought back via Edo Tensei, so obviously this is a retcon. Because beforehand, in the Orochimaru fight, Hiruzen is thinking Orochimaru bringing Minato back is going to be a much bigger problem, but now he thinks Hashirama is the strongest guy. If Hashirama wasn't the strongest guy and he's like, this Jubito guy is stronger than me, Hiruzen will be like, but we have Minato, we're good. Or he would say, yeah, and I don't think even Minato can take care of him. Then that would be Hiruzen acknowledging Minato would be stronger than Hashirama, but obviously this isn't the case. And we see in the Orochimaru fight, he had a very different sentiment.
Or Tobirama, so his idea of how strong they were wouldn't be that great. But once again, he doesn't say that. He talks about how he doesn't want to fight against Hashirama or Tobirama because they're powerful. He talks about Hashirama's deep forest emergence and the threat that it brings. But he never says, oh, this is as powerful as the deep forest emergence as I saw Hashirama use while he was still alive. And it's been established multiple times that the Hashirama and Tobirama that were brought back to fight against Hiruzen were not at their peak power. One, it gets established in the 4th grade Shinobi.
That is established later on to justify why they were so much weak in the Orochimaru fight, constituting a retcon. This is exactly what retcon is. You're given new information later that contradicts something that happened in the past, even if it doesn't break the story, even if it improves the story. They are establishing Hashirama and Tobirama very much nerfed in the Orochimaru fight, even though by everything we know in that fight, it was implied that they were at their peak strength as Kishimoto was writing the fight. That was supposed to be a Hokage level fight. It's literally the name of the chapter, Hokage versus Hokage. We're supposed to witness what Kages are like. And never are we given any indication that Hashirama and Tobirama are weaker than they should be. Because if that was the case, Hiruzen and even the Anbu watching the fight, and even maybe Orochimaru who is controlling them should acknowledge, yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, they are not as powerful as they used to be, but they're still going to be very useful.
World's War that Orochimaru really didn't have the ability to control Hashirama or Tobirama, and two, it gets established that
It is established in the Fourth Great Ninja War, 500 chapters later or so.
Orochimaru was still very...
So, it's a retcon. Let's explain why things are happening the way they are happening right now, and kinda retroactively give a new explanation as to why the Hokages weren't as powerful when Orochimaru first brought them back. I know there's a name for that thing when you do it in a story,
very much trying to perfect Edo Tensei over the course of Part 1 and Part 2 of Naruto.
This is a great explanation to justify the retcon, to say, actually, Hashirama and Tobirama are much more powerful than you know. But everything that we know in Naruto Part 1, when we see the fight against Orochimaru there, is indicating that they were at the peak of their power, or very close to it at least. As I said before, Hiruzen was much more afraid of Minato than Hashirama.
Implying that the first time that we ever see him use it, which is in this battle against Hiruzen, this is by far and away not a perfected project. And thus the reason that Hiruzen is able to battle against Hashirama, Tobirama, and Orochimaru simultaneously is because A, it's not a peak strength Hashirama and Tobirama, and B, because objectively he kind of doesn't. If you
Yeah, that's the retcon part of it.
go back and read that fight, Hiruzen is fighting for his life. The second that Hashirama uses Wood Release, he nabs Hiruzen. The only reason that Hiruzen's able to get out of it is because he hasn't summoned Monkey King Enma yet.
Yeah, but he gets out of it. What are you talking about? He fights against all of them at the same time, and he does pretty well. And look at the size of this Wood Release Jutsu, the Deep Forest Emergence that Hashirama uses for the first time. It's way smaller than the Deep Forest Emergence Madara uses in the War Arc against Naruto, Inoki, and the others that were there after the meteor strikes. Obviously, this is a lower level of power. And yeah, Hiruzen gets caught with it, but he gets away with it with Enma, a jutsu, a summon that he uses a lot. It's like his go-to. He's always using that thing when he's fighting for real. I don't see that being a problem.
And the only reason that Hiruzen is able to win this fight is A, because he kills himself, and B, because Orochimaru, Tobirama, and Hashirama may not have known about the Reaper Death Seal. Now, I know some of you might be saying, oh, Hashirama was married to an Uzumaki, and he had a lot of dealings with the Uzumaki, and that's where the Reaper Death Seal came from. And you're right, he was married to Mito. Doesn't mean that he knew about the Reaper Death Seal, but
If that was full power Hashirama, do you think Hiruzen would have been able to pull Hashirama's soul out of him? If he couldn't pull Orochimaru's soul out of him, do you think he would be able to do that against Hashirama? Obviously not, right? If the difference in strength between Hiruzen and Orochimaru was enough so that Orochimaru's soul wouldn't be completely pulled out of him, the difference in strength between post-retcon Hashirama and Hiruzen would have been so gargantuan that Hiruzen wouldn't even be able to pull out his pinky.
even if he did know about the Reaper Death Seal, there's no reason for him to dodge it. It's established in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, if a sufficiently powerful person is brought back using Edo Tensei, they are able to control their body to some degree, to be able to hinder themselves in a battle against somebody they don't want to fight. This is best demonstrated when
You're forgetting the fact that Orochimaru wiped Hashirama and Tobirama's psyche. The kunai with a tag that he puts on Hashirama and Tobirama before they even start fighting against Hiruzen is to wipe out their thoughts, their emotions, everything, so they can become completely subservient to Orochimaru. And they only regain their consciousness after Hiruzen pulls out their souls with the Reaper Death Seal. So as Hiruzen was hitting them with it and starting off the jutsu, they were being completely controlled. They had no agency whatsoever.
Hanzo the Salamander fights against Mifune for a second time, and he cuts his own breathing apparatus so that the poison in his gallbladder can affect him. And so if it's very clearly established that Edo Tensei doesn't work on sufficiently powerful people, and the fact that Orochimaru was using a non-perfected form of Edo Tensei on two people he could barely control, why would they be at their peak strength in a battle against Hiruzen who they don't want to fight?
Yeah, and that's the retcon. There you have it. The jutsu was established to be one thing, and later on we got a new explanation saying, actually, no. What you saw that was not what you were thinking. It's this way. That's the retcon. There we go.
But I know, DygoKnight is trying to say that the establishment of this lore at a later time is a retcon. But like was identified in this very video, retcon implies contradiction.
Yes, and the contradiction is that it was implied by subtext and by everything we see in the story there that Hashirama and Tobirama were at their full power when they fought Hiruzen, or very close to it. And if you compare the Hashirama that fought Hiruzen and the Hashirama that fought Madara, I would say that a measly wood clone from that Hashirama that fought Madara would be able to stomp the Hashirama that fought Hiruzen. I don't think that's outrageous to say, because, for example, one Madara would clone would certainly beat the Hashirama who fought Hiruzen.
And there is no contradiction here.
Yes, there is.
It's inherently more interesting writing to have Hashirama and Tobirama pop up into a fight at what is revealed to not be their peak strength than to just have them come in, mollywop Hiruzen, and have Orochimaru win in the Konoha Crush arc. Even if Hashirama was supposed to be weaker, Kishimoto changing that down the line isn't a retcon because
It is, because everything indicates Hashirama was at the peak of his power when he was introduced. Don't you think Hiruzen would be soiling his pants if he thought he was going to fight against Hashirama, the god of shinobi, the man who tamed 8 tail beasts with wood style alone, the man who can regenerate from being cut in half pretty much, the man that has wood style, the strongest Hokage of all time, the god of shinobi? Don't you think he would be a little bit more alarmed? Like, sure, he wasn't having a terrific time or anything when he was fighting against the Edo Tensei there, but don't you think he would at least think, oh god, I have absolutely no chance of winning this fight, like there's nothing I can do, because there wouldn't be if Hashirama was at the peak of his power. But that thought never even crossed his mind.
As quick and strong as ever I see.
That is very obvious when Hiruzen is much more afraid of Minato than Hashirama.
never established that Minato is supposed to be the strongest Hokage in history, stronger than Hashirama. That there's nothing that ever says that. I don't know
As I said, there is.
where we're getting this info.
Is that Kakuzu says, yeah, man, I fought Senju Hashirama back in the day, the first Leaf Ninja I ever fought against. And that was supposed to be a very hype statement for Kakuzu because, well, he fought the first Hokage, so he surely is powerful. Like, he barely lost, but still, because he mentioned it, we're supposed to be, oh, okay, this guy is dangerous and old, so we have to be very careful with him. But then when we learn about Hashirama's real strength, Kakuzu's statement there is a joke. What is the guy that lost to Tenten in the war arc gonna do against Hashirama?
Okay, yeah, no, once again, we got to establish the context here.
In my channel, we have this Tenten joke here and there, so I like to throw in some Tenten jokes, and especially in relates to Cox.
Kakuzu does not lose to Tenten. Kakuzu loses to Tenten, who's wielding one of the treasure tools of the Sage of Six Paths, the Basho-sen,
Whatever, Kakuzu gets blitzed by Izumo and Kotetsu. But yeah, he's fighting against way more people than just Tenten. Tenten kills 1 or 2 of his hearts.
a legendary weapon, literally created by Hagoromo. And it's not like Kakuzu actually loses to Tenten. One of Kakuzu's masks is destroyed by Tenten. But even if you wanted to downplay the strength of Kakuzu to that of Tenten, the statement that Kakuzu has that he fought against Hashirama doesn't really change anything. In fact,
It does.
the idea that Hashirama is as strong as we understand him to be makes Kakuzu's statement all the more impressive. But that's not what I'm trying to build at here. See, the fact that Kakuzu survives in a fight against Hashirama doesn't mean that Hashirama was busting out a 1,000-armed Kanon against Kakuzu. It just means that Kakuzu was able to survive a battle against Hashirama.
You see, the statement Kakuzu gives to Kakashi and the others there, you have to read the subtext, because what he's saying there is that he had a fight against Hashirama. Yes, we do not know any other details about it, but the way he's saying, and the intent behind Kakuzu's statement is to portray him as an extremely powerful and dangerous opponent because he fought against Hashirama. And his statement implies that the fight was somewhat close or difficult and that it wasn't a complete humiliation, because otherwise Kakuzu wouldn't mention that. Or maybe he's just lying, but that doesn't really feel like Kakuzu's personality there. He would be telling the truth to Kakashi and the others. And by what we see Kakuzu doing in Naruto Shippuden, not even counting the war, let's just take a look at what he can do against Kakashi, Shikamaru, Naruto and everything. Sure, he's strong, like he's not gonna be weak or anything. However, when you compare that strength to post-retcon Hashirama, you're gonna come to the conclusion that it's a complete joke. His statement there makes absolutely no sense, because remember, Kakuzu fought against Hashirama when he was already a Leaf Ninja, meaning that the Leaf Village had already been formed, meaning that Hashirama was the Hokage and he was an adult, meaning he was very powerful. Remember what Hashirama could do against Madara in the Valley of the End, for example. What can Kakuzu do against it? If Kakuzu blasts every single elemental transformation ninjutsu from every single one of his hearts at the same time against Hashirama, and Hashirama does not defend himself, he's going to tank that without a problem. The problem here is the disconnect between Kakuzu's strength in Naruto Shippuden when he fights against Naruto and Kakashi, and the strength we see Hashirama being portrayed with against Madara and in the war arc. It makes no sense for Kakuzu to be hyping himself up, stating that he fought against Hashirama, and yes, he didn't say he won a fight against Hashirama, so he lost. Otherwise, he would say, yeah, I won against the first Hokage. But even so, that's statement implies that the fight was at least somewhat difficult. Otherwise, he wouldn't say that, right? He's trying to make himself stronger. He's trying to intimidate the Leaf Village. He's trying to do all those things. But if he just watched Hashirama from afar and tossed a kune at him and ran away, that's not exactly fighting him, right? Now, maybe you can say he's lying, but the initial purpose of this statement from a story perspective was to hype Kakuzu up by saying he fought against the first Hokage. And Kakashi says, oh, okay, if you fought against the first Hokage, then we are kids to you. And yes, Kakashi's saying the first Hokage was extremely powerful. Obviously, every single Hokage would have been extremely powerful, but not at the same power he is portrayed later on against Madara, for example. Definitely not that. Because if that was the case, and by the way, Kakuzu said that, he's implying he fought a big fight against Hashirama, Kakashi should have been absolutely terrified. Like, what? You fought against Hashirama and survived? That's insane. Or he should challenge Kakuzu's statement there saying, I mean, you're strong, but you're not Hashirama strong. That makes no sense. This was done before Hashirama was elevated to the status of Gutter Shinobi within the story.
We don't know how that fight went, how Kakuzu fared, but we do know that Kakuzu lost, which is why he gets thrown out of the Village of Waterfalls. So it's a weird piece of evidence to use with the idea that the deification of Hashirama was a retcon, because regardless of how strong Hashirama was, it doesn't really change anything. Kakuzu lost to Hashirama, but fighting against Hashirama.
As I said, the context of this line here implies the fight was difficult and implies it was like at least close in some way. It's either that or, you know, Kakuzu's just completely lying.
Hashirama, who was a Hokage, was still impressive for Kakuzu. If Kakuzu said he had survived a battle against Inoki, Tobirama, Tsunade, any Kage, that would be impressive.
It would be, sure. The problem is, when you consider the power level Hashirama hits by the end of Naruto Shippuden, that statement just makes no sense because he simply wouldn't have been able to survive. Kakashi should have challenged his statement saying, wait, did he let you go? Did he spare your life? That's the only way Kakuzu could have survived, if they actually fought against each other.
But yeah, obviously saying you survived the battle against Hashirama, who was able to punch Susanoo off of Kurama, is pretty much the most impressive thing you could say, but I still don't understand how that substantiates the argument.
See, using the 1,000-armed Buddha statue against the majestic attire Susanoo, for example. I don't see a lot he can do there. So obviously this is because Minato was supposed to be stronger and Hashirama wasn't supposed to be that godlike figure, but I really like the addition of Hashirama being that powerful. And that doesn't really break the universe in any way. Yes, Minato was said to be very strong, and he still is. It's just that Hashirama is stronger. And yeah, I guess Kakuzu did fight against Hashirama. It's just that it was a complete stomp and Hashirama let him go free. I like this retcon.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, we're just disagreeing on what a retcon is here. I can yell to the stars as long as I want that there's no evidence that ever states that Minato is stronger than Hashirama, but
I've already said there is a lot of evidence. What can I say?
Alright, let's just move on.
Most retcons in the Naruto series. The only retcon that I absolutely despise in the Naruto series is the Black Zetsu Kaguya and the Otsutsuki retcon. I mean, they're pretty much the same thing. Also, the reincarnations of Naruto and Sasuke being Indra and Ashura. It's all
Alright, listen, I'm not gonna sit here and say that I love the idea that Naruto and Sasuke are reincarnations. I'm also not gonna sit here and say that I loved the introductions of the Otsutsuki. I love Boruto, but I don't think Naruto needed to suffer because of it. However, the only thing that is technically retconned through the reveal of any of this is the fact that Naruto is some scrappy orphan who had to work for everything he ever got. But even that isn't necessarily a retcon because it worked for everything he ever got. But even that isn't necessarily a retcon because it's never explicitly stated by the manga. It's just fans believe that Naruto is a scrappy underdog who had to scratch and claw for every tidbit of power he ever got. And in a sense, he did, but the reveal that he was some mythical reincarnation of a former god's child does technically take a lot of weight out of that argument.
But can you see here that this is also a retcon? Even if there was nothing pre-established that would be debunked, even if something wasn't pre-established, then Naruto was not the reincarnation of Ashura. The idea was that, no, Naruto is just a kid that got a tail beast still inside of him. Yes, he is very important. Yes, he's the son of the 4th Hokage, but you never got the sense, you never got the idea that Naruto is the reincarnation of a demigod in his own universe. Ideas, concepts, feelings that you get from reading the story that are contradicted later on are also retcons. Not everything has to be literally spelled out in the page for you to consider it a retcon. And the way I go about analyzing these retcons, talking about them, is just to have fun, to analyze the story, the ins and outs of how Kishimoto writes the characters and the plot and everything. Dissecting the story from an out-of-universe perspective, trying to figure out what was going on as Kishimoto wrote the story. What was he thinking? What was he trying to accomplish with this or that? What is this retcon bringing to the story? What is this retcon affecting in the story? How is it good or bad? And sometimes it doesn't have to be something completely spilled out. Naruto was never said not to be a reincarnation. And there isn't anything stopping him from being that in the beginning of the series, but the vibe you get from the story, everything. And the same thing goes for the Otsutsuki clan and the alien god thing. Nothing in the story ever indicates that the story is going to end up being about a fight against an alien goddess that comes to Earth, eats an apple, tries to cast Infinite Tsukuyomi, gets killed by her children, comes back. No. When ideas are contradicted, as we've seen in the definition, that can also constitute a retcon and a contradiction.
This isn't necessarily a contradiction. Yes, Naruto gets into a bunch of heated debates with people like Neji about how people can rise from nothing and become something, but those arguments don't necessarily become invalid the second that Naruto gets revealed as Asura's reincarnation. So like,
many of the arguments Naruto has with Neji and other people, and several other concepts introduced in the Naruto series, are contradicted in a meta sense by the introduction of the reincarnations. So it's still a retcon. If you're changing a bit of the thematics of the story, if you're changing how the story feels, that can also be a retcon. It's in the realm of ideas, but as we've seen in the definition for the word contradiction, that counts.
like, yeah, was this Kishimoto's original plan when he was penning chapter 1? No, probably not, but that doesn't mean it's a retcon. Stories grow as authors write them. That's just the way that they work. Just because a story has a different ending from what the author intended 20 years ago when they started the story does not mean that's a retcon.
It doesn't mean that, but it can be, and sometimes it is.
It just means the author's idea.
For example, Boruto appearing in the last chapter of Naruto is not a retcon. I am 1000% sure Kishimoto never planned for his final chapter to be about the sequel character. The final chapter of the Naruto series has Boruto as its main character, which is absolutely stupid. But Boruto existing there is not a retcon. Yeah, Naruto had a kid. That makes sense. Nothing is contradicted. Yeah, sure, the romantic development between Naruto and Hinata was absolute trash. There was pretty much nothing at all throughout the entire series. But we can kind of accept that, yeah, they got together after the war. We don't see it happening, but it makes sense. And then they have a kid. That's not a retcon. It's terrible, it's awful, but it's not a retcon. However, Kaguya, Black Zetsu, those certainly are retcons.
Idea of how they wanted this story to end changed.
Are you gonna tell me that when Kishimoto started writing Naruto, he was like, yeah, this world, it was created by alien gods that gave chakra to mankind? No, obviously not. And it absolutely ruins the story so much so that I ignore everything that happens after Black Zetsu stabs Madara from behind, because it's terrible. If that didn't happen in the Naruto story, Naruto would literally be a 10 out of 10 manga. But alas, not everything can be perfect. Some retcons, like this one, are terrible. And this retcon kinda requires Kishimoto to rewrite the entire history of the Naruto universe.
Okay, once again, is it a great ending to Naruto? No, I'm not gonna sit here and defend it. But we have no way of knowing what Kishimoto identified as the actual ending of Naruto in 2001 or whatever when he started writing this manga. We can't call something a retcon because we find the ending ridiculous.
As I said, I was explaining this when I was talking about Boruto being chapter 700. It doesn't have to be a retcon, but this one was. It's just that easy.
Disagree with it as the ending for one of our favorite mangas. Is it bad writing? Sure. Was it done so that Boruto could have an interesting plot? 100%. Did it
Boruto has a... What? No, that's...
kind of ruin the ending of Naruto? I mean, that's up to you. I don't really mind it all that much. But does any of that make it a retcon? No. Every bit of the ending is explained meticulously in detail. Black Zetsu is
Explaining something does not mean it's not a retcon. The explanation is what makes it a retcon. There is no retcon if there is no further explanation changing the outlook you had in a certain topic beforehand. That's what constitutes a retcon.
the idea that the Uchiha have been giving into the cycle of hatred for the entirety of their existence because he altered their stone tablet, that in order to unlock their true strength, they had to either kill their best friend or watch their best friend die to unlock the MS. To get the EMS, they had to fuse the MS of a family member with their own MS, and that to unlock the Rinnegan, they had to combine the chakras of the descendants of the Uchiha and the Senju. And if we're gonna be surprised by the reveal of Kaguya, why weren't we surprised by the idea of the Ten Tails and the
Ten Tails was also a retcon. it's just that the Ten Tails is good, Kaguya is bad. As I was explaining in the video, the only retcon I really despise in the Naruto series is the Kaguya Black Zetsu thing. I'm fine, or I love all the others. I'm fine with, or I love, pretty much all other retcons. Do you really think the Rinnegan was supposed to be an evolution of the Sharingan when it was introduced? Obviously not. It was retcon to be that way. I have a video about it. So the whole thing about Geromazo and the Ten Tails is kind of a retcon by extension of that.
Ghetto statue and Hagoromo. You're telling me that the idea of Kaguya launches up red flags for you, but the fact that there was a giant, controllable by the Rinnegan, hollow husk of a 10-tails beast with no discernible origin wasn't also shocking? Which
No, by the way, it happened in the story. It was very organic. It made sense. Nothing was absolutely destroyed, and it didn't unravel the series like, you know, what happened with Madara, Black Zetsu, and Kage there in the work, which absolutely ruins the Naruto series, was definitely not something done by the Geromazo, or the Rinnegan controlling it, or the Geromazo stealing the tail beasts. It was another very interesting, cool-looking, and thematically sensible element in the Naruto series.
mind you, happens long before Kaguya is revealed. If you want to have beef with Kaguya, have beef with the entire Eye of the Moon plan, because the entire Eye of the Moon plan does set up for Kaguya's reveal.
Yeah, the thing is, the Eye of the Moon plan is a very interesting philosophical debate that characters have and that the audience itself can have. Is Madara right trying to put everybody in the Matrix and making everybody happy? Or is that morally wrong? You can literally have a philosophical debate about that, but then when Kaguya shows up, actually, the Eye of the Moon plan is just going to transform everybody into white Zetsu so he can fight the other Otsutsukis coming to Earth or something. I don't know what Boruto came up with. I don't care, it's not canon. So even the Eye of the Moon plan itself was retconned into being something else. No, it's not the final goal of Madara, trying to bring peace, stability, and utopia to this world. No, it's just that you're gonna become a white Zetsu because Kaguya says so. That's it.
All explained, and therefore not a retcon, sure.
And that's the thing. Just because something is explained, it doesn't mean it's not a retcon. The explanation many times makes it a retcon.
Maybe it's not what Kishimoto envisioned for the ending when he was beginning Naruto, but we can't know that. You can say it's a bad ending, but don't mislabel it as a retcon.
Has to do a lot of explaining, especially because there was no foreshadowing at all prior to chapter 630 or so. The first minute piece of foreshadowing for Black Zetsu being around was Hashirama noticing somebody was watching his fight against Madara after he stabs Madara.
All right, sure, yeah, Hashirama looks up and like, what's going on up there? But it's also established that Madara enters his fight with the full intention of dying, so that he can combine his chakra with that of Hashirama, unlock the Rinnegan, and enact the Eye of the Moon plan. On top of this, Black Zetsu was introduced much earlier than chapter 630.
Obviously, he is introduced much earlier. I'm talking about the foreshadowing about Black Zetsu eventually betraying Madara and being Kaguya's will. I'm not talking about Black Zetsu himself. I'm talking about the concept, the retcon that's done so that the entire story shifts to focus on the Otsutsukis.
Sure, Black Zetsu might have seemed more like an intel gatherer for the Akatsuki,
That was his function.
more of a background character than an end-game villain. But when Oda has some background character revealed in chapter...
I don't know, I haven't read One Piece. I mean, I read One Piece up until chapter 55. I did not like it and I dropped it, so I know pretty much nothing about it.
212 turned out to be an endgame-esque villain in chapter 1000. Everybody calls it foreshadowing. Why isn't that a retcon? And I think that's what makes
I don't know, I haven't read One Piece, so I can't comment on that, but it doesn't seem like your argument makes too much sense.
me so angry about this video. Any manga that goes longer than 100 or so chapters is gonna have things like this happen. And yet for some reason, the only...
Yeah, retcons, they're normal. It's fine. As I was saying in my video, retcons can be really good for the story. I like pretty much all of them. I just call them retcons because it's what they are.
manga that has the retcon label thrown at it is Naruto.
I talk about Naruto retcons because my channel is about Naruto. I don't do pretty much anything else on my channel other than Naruto, so if I'm gonna talk about a retcon, it's gonna be about Naruto. I could talk about other retcons, but my channel's about Naruto, so that's what I talk about.
Which makes no sense to me. Dealing that Oda, the person who publicly stated that One Piece was only supposed to take 5 years to write and is now almost 30 years into writing it as a manga, fully anticipated every single character he introduced in 1999 to be doing what they're currently doing right now in One Piece. The answer is no, and yet we're not looking at One Piece and saying, oh, it's riddled with
I don't know, if I was looking at One Piece, I probably would be doing that.
retcons. And I wouldn't do that to One Piece because that's just the writing process. Oda wanted to...
A retcon is a writing tool. It can be used for good and it can be used for bad. It's like a flashback. A flashback is a writing tool. It can be a good one and it can be a bad one. It's just that for some reason people equate retcons to plot holes in something that's bad. It's not necessarily bad.
to write the story longer, and thus he did. Kishimoto's editors wanted the story to be longer, and thus it got longer. That's not a retcon, it's an adjustment. It's character development.
It's an adjustment that causes retcon retcons to happen. Simple as that.
It could have been anybody else. We knew Madara had survived, so maybe it was just Madara looking around in some weird way. Some people are gonna say that Black Zetsu showing up after Naruto and Sasuke fight for the first time in the Valley of the End is foreshadowing, but no, he was the intel gathering guy in the Akatsuki.
Oh my god, yeah, he was. And Bon Clay was just a member of the, I don't know, Whiskey Peak Pirates until Impel Down.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Blackbeard was an eccentric and boss manga. That's what makes them interesting.
And then there's some retcons that kind of change how the series operates in terms of its power system. For example, do you remember that the Chidori wasn't even a lightning style jutsu in Naruto Part 1? Nor was Temari's wind style jutsu. She never says wind style, fan blowing thing. Never. That's because in the beginning, the Naruto power system wasn't completely based on the 5 element transformations and yin and yang release as well. It was supposed to be something far more varied.
When is it ever established that it was supposed to be more varied than the 5 elements in yin and yang? Yes.
When Orochimaru seals the 9 tails with a 5-pronged seal, we see some very strange quote-unquote elements on his seals, like on his finger. Call me crazy, but I get the feeling the power system initially had way more to do with that. Like the Chidori, for example, which I was talking about there, was said to be a chakra discharge that was created by the speed of the character. When you go so fast, the chakra becomes visible and you're able to strike with extreme precision. It just so happened to look like lightning, but the way the explanation is given is very much different from the way the explanation is given in Naruto Shippuden, and I talk a little bit about that in my Chidori versus Raikiri video.
Obviously, there's things like Kekkei Genkai, Kekkei Mora, and Kekkei Toda introduced, and yeah, the Raikiri isn't technically called a lightning release move initially, but Raikiri in Japanese literally means lightning cutter.
Yes, and that's because Kakashi cut a lightning bolt with it. That's the legend of it. It's first called Chidori. That's the original name of the jutsu because it resembles the sound of 1,000 chirping birds. But then, when Kakashi cuts through a lightning bolt, it gets a new name. Kakashi's Chidori becomes the Raikiri. Check out my video about the differences between Chidori and Raikiri if you're interested to learn more, but it's not because it's a lightning style jutsu, but it's because it cut a lightning bolt.
And yeah, it's originally talked about like it's condensing so much chakra around your hand that it sounds like 1,000 screaming birds, which is what Chidori means, but it's also never established that it's not lightning jutsu.
It's never established as it being not lightning jutsu, sure, but the way the explanation is given makes you think, oh, it's not. It's a chakra discharge that you create by going really fast. It condenses chakra in your hand. You see, the message the reader gets from reading something is important. And when you contradict that message, that constitutes a retcon. Do I think Chidori being a lightning style jutsu is a bad thing? Absolutely not. It's completely fine. It makes absolute sense. But it was a retcon.
And sure, Temari isn't saying wind style, wind scythe, but she's also opening a giant fan and launching so much wind at people that it cuts down forests. And pretty much that exact same arc when Hiruzen is battling against Orochimaru, it is very clearly established that there is elemental releases.
Obviously, we've seen that ever since the Bell test when Sasuke uses fire style, fireball jutsu. Also, in Land of Waves, with water style and everything, Kakashi versus Zabuza, that was not the case for Chidori and even Temari's wind style there.
Tied to ninjutsu, as both Tobirama and Hiruzen use high-level water releases without a water source, something that the Anpu who are watching the fight revel at. And while sure Chidori isn't called lightning release Chidori, it's also rarely referred to as lightning release Chidori or Raikiri later on in Naruto. But sure, I concede the point that in the early parts of Naruto, the Raikiri was talked about as a condensing of chakra so dense that you were able to see it with your eye, which is later kind of a duh moment because it's lightning release, and why wouldn't you be able to see lightning release? And honestly, if there's a retcon you should talk about, it's that. The fact that chakra...
Yeah, that was my point here, that the Chidori was a different thing. The condensing of chakra, the chakra being visible. It was a thing back in the Land of Waves and before that, but it was forgotten. But I wasn't talking too much in depth about every single retcon that I was mentioning because I didn't want the video to be 2 hours long like this one.
Was established as invisible in the beginning of Naruto and then was proven time and time again to be very much visible, as multiple elementless ninjutsu were very much visible, like the Rasengan. That right there is kind of retcon until you consider the fact that, oh, maybe like the Chidori, the Rasengan is so dense with chakra, it's visible. See, that's the thing with trying to introduce contradictory talk into Naruto. The more you know about Naruto, the more you can realize, oh yeah, no, there actually might not be a contradiction here. Yeah, you can point out the fact that it was weird that chakra...
I could make a video about this, about the visibility of chakra, but in the beginning of Naruto, it's very much implied that you could pretty much never see chakra, which is kind of funny because it's completely gone away with. And yeah, your argument about the density of chakra, it does make sense if you want to keep that element in the series of you not being able to see chakra generally, but this is completely forgotten over the series. And it makes sense because it's much cooler if you can actually see the jutsu the character's using. It makes sense from an artistic perspective.
It was identified as invisible in the beginning of Naruto, but then it became highly visible towards the end of Naruto. But when you begin to think about the fact that we only ever really paid attention to the very important ninjas in Naruto who were ridiculously powerful and therefore able to condense their chakra at a level that most ninjas wouldn't be able to, that it makes sense to a lot of people that chakra all of a sudden became real visible. But I digress, let's continue.
And I can see that, like a fodder ninja, Iruka for example, his chakra wouldn't be visible. We see in chapter 1 that Naruto's chakra was visible. Now, is this just a visual representation of his chakra for the readers to see, but in universe that's not actually happening? Maybe, but that would be weird.
Obviously, it's not because a new element was introduced in the series that it's a retcon. For example, when Jiraiya uses Sage Mode for the first time, even though we had no idea what that was beforehand, it doesn't really contradict anything that was established beforehand. It's a new powerful jutsu that Jiraiya has access to, and it makes complete sense. But we didn't really know that nature energy was a thing. True, we didn't, but nature energy is something that only a few people have access to. That.
All right, but I'm going to use the same logic against you here. Do you think that when Kishimoto was penning chapter 1 of Naruto, that he believed that Naruto was going to go train in Mount Muabuko with a bunch of toads and become a toad sage and learn things like—
Maybe not, maybe he didn't, but that does not contradict anything in the story. Naruto learning and progressing his powers into the toads, into his summons, into what Jiraiya taught him, makes complete sense in the story. It's not something that, first and foremost, contradicts anything pre-established in the story, and it also does not contradict the vibe the story gives, the thematics of the story, and any other elements that are more ideas than anything else.
like Froggy Kumite that allow for him to dodge the attacks of people by sensing them because he's pulling in nature energy and melding it with his own, and he's able to tap into additional nature energy because his clones are off somewhere, bringing that nature energy into themselves, and when they disappear, it goes back to Naruto.
That makes absolute sense as well, because Naruto frequently uses his shadow clones to aid with his jutsus, with the Rasengan, for example, now with Sage Mode, and then with the Rasen Shuriken. He uses his clones to do parts of the jutsu that he's unable to do by himself so that he can focus on 2 things or 3 things at the same time. That makes absolute sense, and when Naruto masters Sage Mode by doing that, you're like, oh, this is great writing, man. It's so satisfying, and it doesn't contradict anything because Naruto has been always doing that.
I mean, maybe, we can't possibly know, but just because you appreciate that as a writing point doesn't mean that Kishimoto had that idea when he was beginning Naruto.
Not every idea that's newly introduced is a retcon, but several of them are. The ones I've explained are retcons. Sage Mode being introduced, maybe Kishimoto didn't have that idea from chapter 1, and if I were to guess, I would say he didn't. But it being introduced later on, it just makes sense as a new interesting power-up that Naruto uses that's very thematic, that's very cool looking as well, and that's why I use it as a point in my video. Now, some people may even say, no, it was a retcon, nature energy should have been explained before, but Jiraiya was literally the only human alive able to use Sage Mode by the time he fought against Pain, and he pretty much never used Sage Mode because he got ugly with those toad-like features and everything, so he tried to avoid the jutsu, but now he's fighting against Pain, he has to go all out, so it makes sense why Jiraiya would never mention that to Naruto. Now, could Kishimoto have given some indication as to Jiraiya wanting to teach Naruto Sage Mode eventually? Sure, I suppose he could have, but it doesn't do any disservice to the story that he didn't.
And that's why this entire argument of, oh, Kishimoto didn't plan it when he was starting Naruto, and therefore it is a retcon, is so silly because there's no way to prove what he had planned.
You can prove things he had and he hadn't planned by reading the story and analyzing things pretty deeply. And sometimes elements that you can say are retcons, for example, Sage Mode, you'll just never know. You'll never know if Kishimoto had that plan from the beginning. I think he didn't, but he may have had. The thing is, Naruto was a story that changed a lot throughout its run, and that's fine. It's just that retcons happen because of it, and I like analyzing them.
Just pointing at the parts of the story that you don't like and say, oh, surely
What? The only point of the story that I don't like that I was pointing to was the Kaguya Black Zetsu thing. Everything else that I mentioned, Hashirama and Minato's strength levels, the Chidori, the tail beasts, I like all those things. It's only the Kaguya thing that I don't like. I don't understand your argument here.
that must be a retcon. And in no better way is that better to
It's not like that. I don't point out things that I don't like and say they're retcons. I even said that Boruto being introduced in the final chapter is not a retcon. It's terrible, but it's not a retcon.
played by the fact that you're saying that it's okay that they introduced nature energy in Sage mode, and therefore not a retcon, but it is a retcon that Chidori was originally identified as.
Yes, because it was originally identified as something else and then changed to be a lightning style jutsu that has a completely different property and vibe to it. You see the contradiction there. There is no previously established Sage mode type jutsu that is contradicted by Jiraiya and Naruto using Sage mode in Naruto Shippuden. Now, you may argue that the curse mark being Sage energy is a retcon, right? Because we did not know that in Naruto Part 1, and I don't think Kishimoto had the intention of it being Sage energy in Naruto Part 1, but it's not a retcon because it doesn't contradict anything. We just didn't know where the curse energy came from. A firm explanation was not given to us in Naruto Part 1, and when we learned the curse mark is actually Sage energy, used in a more unfiltered way, that's pretty interesting. It doesn't contradict anything, and it even adds to the Sage mode aspect of the story.
As lightning release, that makes no sense.
And then we have some things like Toby being Obito that were always planned from the very beginning. We can see Obito's picture on top of Kakashi's bed in the beginning of Naruto chapter 7, so Obito had been planned out way early on, and for the first time Toby is introduced, yes, Kishimoto intended that character to be Obito, always. Obviously that wasn't a retcon. Also, Itachi being a good guy all along, that one is very debatable.
I don't know how to respond to the Obito. Yes, Obito was always Obito. I don't. What are we saying about Itachi here?
Wait, why are you? I don't understand why he's mad about this. A lot of people in the Naruto community are like, oh man, Obito was never Toby, or Obito shouldn't have been Toby, and I've seen people pointing out that no, Kishimoto changed his mind. Toby was not supposed to be Obito. Toby was supposed to be Madara, or Shisui, or whatever else. Yes, most people thought Toby was Obito from the beginning, or didn't really complain when it turned out to be Obito, but I've seen people complaining about it. And so I'm just saying that Kishimoto's intentions with Toby were very clear from the start.
Also, Itachi being a good guy all along, that one is very debatable on whether or not Kishimoto intended that to be the case from the beginning, and it warrants an entire video for itself, which I'm probably gonna make in the future. But yeah, retcons like that don't break the story.
All right, so okay, so this is a common theory that Itachi was actually evil, but because so many people loved him as a character, Kishimoto was pressured into turning him into a good guy in Shippuden. Now,
I've never seen that angle of it, that because so many people love the guy, Kishimoto chose to make him a good character. From my perspective, he would change Itachi's character to further develop Sasuke's character. I've never really considered the fan cry or anything, but the Itachi thing has a lot more nuance than one might think. I'm gonna make a video about it. There's a lot of gray area of what Kishimoto wanted to do in the beginning. My initial thought is that Itachi wasn't really supposed to be a completely evil douchebag from the beginning, like 100% evil, but I don't think he was supposed to be 100% good either. There was somewhat of a middle ground, but then he kind of leaned on the good side a little bit more in the end.
obviously, because the story panned out in the way that it did, we can't confirm as to whether or not that theory is correct. But the point that a lot of people point out here is, oh, Itachi was way too evil to Sasuke as a kid to ever be a good guy. To which the literally only response you can possibly give is literally everything the story told us. Oh, it was completely unnecessary to make Sasuke see the death of his parents 1,000 times. I mean, yeah, maybe, until you realize what Itachi was trying to accomplish. See, Itachi had seen the altered stone tablet created by Black Setsu. So far as Itachi understood, the only way for the Uchiha to get strong was through hatred and, at the highest level, the stealing of the Mangekyo Sharingan of those they're related to.
Would Itachi really want Sasuke to go through that, even if it's for him to get strong? I don't know. With the Itachi we know in Naruto Shippuden after the reveal, that seems a little bit too harsh. Even if it's for Sasuke to get strong. Like, beat up Sasuke in that hotel, sure. Put him under a genjutsu to see his parents dying once, sure. Put him under Tsukuyomi? If Itachi loves Sasuke more than anything else in the world, which is established later on, would he really torture his little brother for 24 hours? Knowing that Sasuke would be knocked out indefinitely, and the only person that was able to take him out of that state was Tsunade, the best magic ninja in the world, and she wasn't even around the village at that point. And that's why I say there's nuance. Kishimoto's original intentions were probably different. Then again, I don't even mention a side, quote-unquote, in this video. I just say that there's more to it than you would expect, and then I'll make a video. I don't know why he's going off of it so long, but anyway.
And thus, from the very moment that Itachi cut down the entire clan and kept Sasuke alive, Itachi understood a couple of things. One, he was dying, and two, his death would make Sasuke stronger. Not only by allowing Sasuke to unlock the MS, but also by allowing—
Yeah, but that's much later in Naruto Shippuden. You see, what I'm doing here, I think there's a disconnect, because I am talking about things out of universe. I'm analyzing the writing decisions. I'm analyzing what Kishimoto Kishimoto was trying to do with the story itself. He's looking at it from a much more in-universe perspective. It's like, oh, Itachi did so-and-so because Sasuke was going through this and he was going to die and everything. But I'm more so looking at the writing aspect of it and not so much the in-universe perspective.
Sasuke to unlock the EMS. And so why was Itachi so incredibly evil to Sasuke? Because he needed Sasuke to hate him. Itachi was actually successful in what he was trying to accomplish with Sasuke. Itachi spent his entire life being taken advantage of by Danzo, by Hiruzen, by Fugaku, his own clan. His strength was an asset that other people tried to use to further their own goals. And therefore Itachi tried very, and I mean very hard, to make sure that the same thing wouldn't happen to Sasuke. That Sasuke would be powerful enough to stand on his own, uninfluenced by the powerful forces surrounding him. And thus,
Itachi more than anyone else knows that being strong alone is not going to save you from being manipulated. He suffered that firsthand in the Leaf Village, and so just making Sasuke strong, just creating those scenarios where Sasuke's hatred will grow towards Itachi, and then Sasuke will awaken more powerful versions of the Sharingan, by itself is not everything Itachi should do for Sasuke. He also has to make sure he'll be surrounded by good people, that he'll learn the right lessons, that he'll be able to look out for people that are trying to take advantage of him, and Itachi's actions there push Sasuke towards Orochimaru. Orochimaru literally tried to do that with Itachi himself, and Sasuke wasn't as powerful as Itachi was at the age Orochimaru tried to do that with Itachi. So if Orochimaru tried to take over Sasuke's body when Sasuke was about 14 or so and not 16, there would have been a problem there for Sasuke and therefore for Itachi, because Itachi's goal is to protect Sasuke. You can argue this is a flaw in Itachi's plan. There's so many flaws in Itachi's plan. That's why the character is fascinating. I'm just saying the initial intention of Kishimoto may have been different, and I'm going to make a video analyzing everything.
in order to accomplish this goal, Itachi had to make sure that Sasuke hated him as much as possible. And thus, yeah, he had to assume the role of the evil older brother. And while you can say, oh, he was too evil, well, that's your opinion. Just because you believe Itachi was too evil in part 1 to be revealed as a good guy in part 2 doesn't mean it's a retcon. It means it was a surprise you didn't see coming. And
it was definitely a surprise. It was a plot twist in the Naruto series, probably the biggest plot twist in the Naruto series. It didn't say anything in this video that he's reacting to. It said there's more new ones. There's a debate.
Just because a plot twist you were surprised by happened doesn't mean that it was a retcon. It just makes Itachi a more compelling character, because to us he seemed evil, and he was supposed to because we were watching the story through the eyes of Sasuke. Not a retcon, just interesting writing.
If the author has a better idea of how to develop things in the future with this newly established element. It's one thing to make Hashirama the god of shinobi, but it's another thing to make Naruto, a character we knew was 12 years old around the Chunin exams, be 18 in the Search for Tsunade arc, for example. This would be a type of retcon. Oh, actually, Naruto? No, he was 18 all along. It contradicts a previously established element, but it's so grotesque that you're like, oh, this makes absolutely no sense.
What just happened? Naruto's 12. He's 15 after the time skip. He's not 18 on the search to,
You didn't understand what I was saying here. I was giving a hypothetical example of stupid, grotesque retcon. A hypothetical thing that if, for example, Kishimoto made Naruto all of a sudden be 18 years old in the Search for Tsunade arc, and he was obviously established as being a kid in the Chunin exams and beforehand, that would have been a terrible retcon. Now, yes, you could have done that if, Kishimoto did a 6-year time skip between the Chunin exams and the Search for Tsunade arc. But my point was that a retcon can be terrible if you don't implement it correctly and create a grotesque plot hole. It was an example. It wasn't something that literally happened in the series, obviously.
Are you saying that would be a retcon? Like, oh, Naruto was 12 and now he's 8. Yeah, that would be a retcon, because that would contradict what we've learned previously in the story, unless they told us there was a 6-year time skip. That is a retcon. I'm confused. Do you know that? Because that would be a retcon.
And this is, let's go back here. Hold on. Pay attention
with this newly established element. It's one thing to make Hashirama the god of shinobi, but it's another thing to make Naruto, a character we knew was 12 years old around the Chunin exams, be 18 in the Search for Tsunade arc, for example. This would be a type of retcon. Oh, actually, Naruto? No, he was 18 all along. It contradicts a previously established element.
So yeah, I think it's easy to understand, right? I'm just comparing two different types of retcon. One that works within the story, one that doesn't break the universe, and one that absolutely does, and it makes no sense whatsoever. I was just giving a very outlandish example.
But so, for example, role-playing games, when a player's like, oh, can I actually have done something different beforehand so this doesn't happen now? And the game master's like, sure, let's go for it. But obviously you shouldn't do something like that when writing a story. Right, Kishimoto? Why did you put a bunch of aliens in the story? I know it was because of Shonen Jump. They needed a sequel. They needed villains for the sequel.
I think the rest of this video, if I remember correctly, is just him being like, oh, but all of these changes are...
Yeah, the rest of the video is me explaining why Naruto has so many retcons. The rest of the video is the point of the video. and I think he's gonna skip over it.
Totally fine, because drawing a manga is very difficult, which I agree with. But if you're going to acknowledge that drawing a manga is incredibly difficult, and therefore that Masashi Kishimoto was under an insane amount of pressure to extend his story, and therefore fill his story with what you identified to be retcons, then why are you looking at the story and calling all of these supposed changes that literally every person who's ever had to write a story over the course of a decade or longer?
Am I calling these changes out? I am pointing to them and analyzing them and going through why Kishimoto did them. Why would this benefit the story? Because it's interesting from a writing perspective and just from an informative and entertainment perspective as well. I'm not saying Naruto is horrible. Naruto is great, except for the Kaguya thing.
Has had to do retcons.
Watch Boruto. It's fine, I forgive you. But why did Naruto have so many retcons? Well, the inclusion of retcons in the story may have a lot of different explanations, but usually they kind of converge to the same type of reason. An author may add a retcon because he changed his mind about an aspect in the story and he wants to do it differently. He might add a retcon because he thought about a new concept in the story that he finds more interesting. Or he may add a retcon because he needs to stretch the story longer, so he needs more elements to keep the story going.
But no, none of those are retcons. All right, the biggest possible retcon in the Naruto universe exists between Naruto Shippuden and Boruto.
Not canon, so it doesn't matter.
As it currently stands, is a relatively false because
We'll defend
Nobody cares
this
about
to
Boruto.
the end of time that Kishimoto had the Otsutsuki's planned out from chapter 1 or whatever. But no, obviously it's well documented that Kishimoto thought Naruto was going to be a relatively short manga. He never expected it to reach 700 chapters. He probably thought Naruto would be 300 chapters max, but because it was so successful, he had to keep going.
part of the video I'm gonna skip because it's just him talking about editors, like Takahashi, Kishimoto, Ikamoto. Those are all of his editors. They help him write the story.
You can watch the video later, but I talk about how many of the ideas Kishimoto had were from his editors and how they may have caused retcons and things like that. It's an interesting part of the video.
They tell him like, oh, the story needs to get longer. They help him fill in backgrounds, all the kind of thing. Ikamoto now is the person who writes and pretty much dictates the story of Boruto, yada, yada, yada.
So the thing with Kishimoto was that he was writing things as he went. And to be fair, most mangakas are kind of like that. At least to a certain extent. It's only a few mangakas that have everything planned out from the beginning. Like, I've never read One Piece, but apparently Oda has everything planned out.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. All right, so you just pointed out the fact that Kishimoto apparently said that he believed that Naruto was going to be a much shorter manga than it actually ended up to be.
It's every manga, when it becomes successful like that, is going to be stretched by Shonen Jump because that's pretty much the mandate of the company. If something is doing well, they want more of the thing that's doing well to be put out there, so more people will buy the manga, more money for Shonen Jump. That's how it works. The editors in Shonen Jump are there to make the manga succeed and keep running for as long as they possibly can. That's the directive of the company. And yes, Naruto and One Piece are outliers because they're so much more successful than average, but the directive is still the same.
Story, Naruto got up to 700 chapters. And therefore, that's the reason that Naruto is so riddled with retcons. And somehow, some way, your point to substantiate what you just said was that Oda plans out literally everything that's ever happened.
I said apparently One Piece has everything planned out because I've heard a lot of people saying that. One Piece fans are like, oh my god, he's such a genius, he plans everything. As I said, I only read One Piece up until chapter 55, I barely know anything about the story, and I also mentioned Attack on Titan, which that one, yes, that one was pretty much planned out from the beginning. Yes, there may have been changes here and there, but the whole plot of the Attack on Titan story was laid out from the beginning. Character arcs, everything, the big basement reveal. I have more knowledge about that one. I guess you know more about One Piece, so you focus more on that. I was just kind of throwing One Piece out there because I heard a lot of people saying it's like planned out to perfection, but I don't know. Apparently I was wrong.
The exact story you just told about Kishimoto, I actually think is about Oda. Oda didn't intend for One Piece to run for 30 years. It is very well documented that he actually planned for One Piece to run for about 5 years.
That's every manga. No mangaka will ever expect his manga to be a 30-year run. That's just how things operate. They're not expecting that. That's not how Shonen Jump works. Usually your manga is going to get canceled. Getting a manga that lasts so long is a very difficult thing. It's not going to happen very often. Your manga has to be extremely successful. So pretty much every manga that runs for more than like 4 400 chapters is going to be an outlier, and therefore no author is going to be thinking that his story is going to last that long. It makes sense for both Kishimoto and Oda to think the same thing.
Which means for about 25 years of One Piece, Oda has been making things up. So yes, Oda has said multiple times that since the beginning of One Piece, he has had the ending of One Piece planned out. But that means that literally everything that happens between the beginning and the ending of One Piece, by your definition, would be a retcon. So
No, my definition of retcon is very clear. If it doesn't contradict anything that was previously established, then it wouldn't be a retcon. Now you take things a little bit too literally within the story when you're saying my definition of a retcon is different, but as I said, there are several elements in the Naruto series that are introduced later on that are not retcons. I gave 2 examples, Sage Mode and Boruto being a character. I could go on, but I don't think I have to.
we don't even know if Oda is going to write his original ending. Sure, he said that he's had his ending penned since the very beginning, but there's no way for us to confirm that. What if he introduces aliens and everyone hates his ending, and then
That would be kind of terrible, but funny.
they can call his ending a retcon, even though
Yeah, it would definitely be a retcon.
we claim to have penned it from the very beginning? On top of that, if there is a story where characters who are introduced in the beginning of a story are given adjusted roles later in the story, it is One Piece. There is no way that every single character who's been introduced in the One Piece storyline is doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing when Oda picked up the pen third.
Things you're supposed to be doing, you don't elaborate much on that, but are you talking about the profession of a character, the abilities a character has? Well, if a character learns new things or gets a new role in the story, if it doesn't contradict anything, it's not going to be a retcon. Characters develop, characters change, the status quo changes a lot in stories, especially in long stories like One Piece. I would imagine the status quo changes many times.
30 years ago. Throwaway characters like Hachi become important characters in later arcs. However, when it happens in One Piece, people just call it epic foreshadowing. But in actuality, you know what Oda's doing? He's looking back at the characters and story beats that he's written over the course of a 30-year manga and finding ways to make them relevant today.
That's the opposite route. When you look back and you see a particular arc that you did, a particular character, and like, how can I reintroduce this character or this concept in the story without contradicting the things I established beforehand? That's not a retcon. That's just being consistent with the things you've introduced before. Now, giving characters a new role, giving characters more screen time is not necessarily going to be a retcon if they don't contradict anything that happened beforehand. But when the Chidori was said to be a chakra discharge that's created by you moving really fast, and there is never a mention of lightning style, and then later on you learn, oh, it's a lightning style jutsu, that's a retcon. Do you think they wouldn't mention Chidori being lightning style, attacking Gaara's sand, which is part earth style, which is weak against lightning style, when it happened? Because that's a big thing, right? Oh, Sasuke's using Gaara's weakness, earth style is weak against lightning, and then they could mention, oh, but Gaara has magnet style, it's the combination of wind and earth. Guess what? Gaara being a magnet style user is also a retcon. The sand was never supposed to be a quote-unquote style, it's just Gaara's sand jutsu. It's not magnet style. It's retcon later on because Keikei Genkais mostly become the combinations of 2 nature transformations, which wasn't the case in Naruto Part 1. But then if Kishimoto, for example, were to do something like Baki, remember Gaara Sensei, for example? If he became a much more prominent character in the work, and he had a partnership with Genma, the guy he fought off screen in the Chunin exams, and they had this amazing, interesting arc during the work itself, fighting against interesting opponents, cool fights, they learn new jutsus, they become friends, they bond over their conflict in the past, that would not be a retcon. That would just be a further development of the characters and a change in status quo in the story about those characters and about the universe in a smaller way as well, because those 2 characters change.
So yeah, the rest of the video is DygoKnight.
It's me explaining about why Naruto has so many retcons and he's gonna skip over it.
None of these are retcons. There
Yes, they are.
are possible retcons in the Naruto universe. These just aren't them. Retcon, like is established in this video, requires contradiction. And
Yes, and every single retcon that I've mentioned in the video and you tried to debunk here, I think I did a pretty good job in this reaction to provide the contradictions they create. If I didn't, please let me know in the comments. But anyways, if you want to watch my list of Naruto retcons, it's showing up here on screen. Go crazy. There are several interesting retcons that I talk about, most of them which I like. Subscribe. We've just reached 200,000 subs. Let's reach more. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.